Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Wrestling Conversations. I just want to take a second to say thank you to everyone that has checked out this episode and previous ones that we have done. So before we get into the interview today, I wanted you guys to do a couple things for me. So if you could please leave the show a rating, leave us a review, that would certainly be very helpful. Also, please follow us on X. It's kind of weird to keep calling it that, but follow us on X. The handle is at WRES Convo, CONVO, pod, POD. So please give us a follow on there as well. So our guest today is Wai Ting of Post Wrestling. So you can hear Wai on lots of different podcasts from Post, so whether they're reviewing Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, New Japan pay-per-views, they cover all sorts of topics, and Wai is a co-owner of Post Wrestling. So we talk about how he got his start covering wrestling back in the Law radio show days and the Fight Network, and how he and John Pollock started Post Wrestling. So we're going to get into all that and much more. So please give this conversation a listen. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Wrestling Conversations. Today, our guest, Mr. Wai Ting. Wai, thanks for taking the time. How are you?
Hey Matthew, thank you so much for having me here. I'm happy to have a wrestling conversation.
Well, I mean, for you guys too, and I guess for everyone, this has been a pretty crazy week here so far with the passing of Terry Funk and then also Bray Wyatt. I listened to you guys' show that you've done for both of them, and then yesterday I think you guys I listened to that show that you guys did about Bray, and I think you guys really covered it and like the best that you can, and like when everything is still so fresh and just kind of paying tribute. What was your experience like covering that?
Well, yeah, I uh, it's been strange. It's been a really, really weird week. Because so we were looking forward to this week as all in week. It was like the week that I think we were supposed to all just like talk about this, supposedly, well, not supposedly, it is one of the biggest shows of all time in professional wrestling. And the past few days, I mean, everything has just kind of been derailed with, these two tragedies. So it's been a lot of like kind of scrambling. I mean, it's more honestly like on the people who work on the site, on the writing and like constant keeping up to date side of things, in like Neil Flanagan, who's been doing a great job covering the writing on the stories, and of course John, who's also been doing a ton of writing in the midst of preparing for a Terry Funk obituary. I mean, this Bray Wyatt news drops, so my end is more like keeping up with the news so that we could do the audio and providing what we can out there for, I think, the audience who, everybody is looking for, if not necessarily answers, at least, maybe the sound of some familiar voices to kind of talk about, to communally, like, honestly grieve, like, especially in the case of, a surprising death in Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like I'm strictly just a fan, but it's like, yeah, you don't know these people, but if you have spent that much time watching them, they become a big part of your life too. So I think for me, it's helpful just to like almost even process what just like happened by hearing you guys kind of cover it and just have that time to, in a way, I guess, give thanks, like in my own way of just listening to that and just kind of reminiscing. So that was something I think a lot of wrestling fans do appreciate, that you guys cover that in that detail.
Thank you. Oh, well, I'm glad we could provide that. It's honestly like it's a privilege that we actually have a forum, and that we built, a bit of a community to be able to provide that for certain audiences. And we've had a call-in portion on our SmackDown review yesterday, and we just had some really, really, really terrific calls just to be able to hear the sound of people's voices as they talk about their memories, or even through writing. I mean, a lot of people obviously have very kind of complex emotions attached to both of these figures.
Sure, sure. So, and today I want to have you on as a guest too, because I've been aware of you guys for probably close to the beginning when Post started. So this will probably not be a thing where we go step by step, but where did you kind of get your start in covering wrestling to any degree? Was it the radio show, or
I
was it before that?
suppose. Well, I mean, getting involved in the radio show, which was live audio wrestling, but which is sort of what post wrestling grew out of. I actually got into live audio wrestling through television. So we live audio wrestling was owned by a TV channel at that time called Fight Network. So I had actually went to school for television, same program as John Pollock, my partner, and we had they were looking for interns, and I happened to be the right age, and I happened to have the right interest, I suppose, and the right sort of skills they were looking for. And I got in through that as an intern, and pretty much within like my first week, one of the general managers there asked me if I wanted to be a call screener for the radio show. And I had always listened to the law even before, like for years up until that point. I jumped at the opportunity. I mean, I don't even know if I was really getting paid for it or anything, but it was a chance to like be involved. And I would drive like for I feel like a year to years, I want to say 11 p.m. Eastern time on a Sunday night, every week, just to go up there, answer phone calls, and just to kind of be around, this radio show that I really liked. Um, and I did that for a long time, and obviously, throughout, became really good friends with John. We started working together with projects at school, and then eventually, at some point, I started doing more on air, and it wasn't even because I really wanted to. I was perfectly happy doing stuff behind the scenes, but I think John just like, I don't know, found me amusing in whatever ways, and decided to just even like trick me sometimes into being on air by like telling me to just get into a
Sure.
room and talking. And we started doing these little like podcasting was relatively novel at the time. I mean, The Law was a radio show on broadcast radio. But we started uploading those shows onto podcast streams or sort of like podcast platforms. And John also then decided to record a little bit of bonus content. And I suppose that's where we came in. He was looking to do more on air as well. And we started recording these little discussions. And then eventually they evolved into reviews, and they started to get really popular. So Review Away was the name of that little podcast. We started gaining a little bit of a following on our own. And that just, evolved into basically our own Raw reviews, our own SmackDown reviews, our own TNA reviews. And when the law ended, we just decided to carry on, and here's post wrestling.
So, and you mentioned you brought John up too, and I've heard the story of how you and John met. Is that okay? Is this how it actually went down? Where okay, it was through school. I think you were talking about the law, and then John happened over here. Is that actually how that went down?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
Very close, very close. He
Okay.
was the one talking about the law. So I had
Okay.
always seen this guy. In fact, I had classes with this guy, and I never spoke to him. He never spoke to me. We just we never looked like we would ever be friends, I suppose. Or maybe we're just kind of like relatively quiet, believe it or not, outside of like, being on air. And so never really interacted. And then I'll just overhear this guy in this auditorium talking about radio show, this cult radio show that I didn't think anybody listened to, because you have to remember wrestling was still a pretty niche thing. So not only like was this guy talking like about wrestling, but talking about a radio show that aired at like 11 p.m. on a Sunday evening that I
Hmm.
didn't think anybody ever listened to. So I was like, "Hey, are you talking about the law?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm John Pollock. I work on the website, I believe is what he told me." And I'm like, I hear them say, "Oh, thanks to John Pollock," at the end of the show
Yeah.
all the time. So I'm like, I was stunned. I'm like, "You're the John Pollock?" That's sort of like, the big line. "You're the John Pollock?" He's like, "Yeah, I am." You And then I asked for an autograph. No, no, I'm just kidding. And then I was like, "Oh, really cool. That's really cool." So then we didn't even really become friends after that. It wasn't until I realized he worked for the Fight Network, and then we just started to become friends after that way.
Sure. That's one of those. I feel like that's an all-time story. I remember hearing that a while back, and I was like, "Is that really how that? Is that really how that went down?" It's just like, what are the chances of that? Where you were aware of what that is? And I think my scope of things too is like my day-to-day life. I feel like I don't run into anybody. Part of it's where I live. I don't run into anybody that also likes wrestling. So if I were to go talk about this show that I like listening to, odds are people are not going to have any idea what I'm talking about, which
Yeah,
I
very
think
much
is the
so.
way it is. But okay, so when you guys when everything went down with like the Fight Network and the law and everything like that too, was it a debate of what would you do next, or right when that happened, were you guys thinking yes we're going to go on our own and keep this going? What was that time kind of like for you guys?
Hmm. Well, honestly, there wasn't that much debate, because we were talking about doing this even while we were still a part of the Fight Network or the Law.
Mhm.
Um, so the Law was probably like maybe to us, at least our this audience, our most public facing like project that John and I were a part of. But really our full-time jobs was the Fight Network. I was an editor slash camera operator slash like a lot of behind the scenes things. John was did a lot on camera, did a lot maybe behind the scenes for the website at the time, did a lot of writing. Um, and neither of us, I would say, were that happy with our roles there. It was a company that wasn't necessarily growing. We weren't really making more money. We saw a lot of our friends get let go just due to cutbacks. And then we were always talking about what our next step would be. And we saw so much growth potential with our podcast side of things that we were as early as, I think we got let go on the Monday, but it was like the Friday where we were having our own private discussions about like, hey, like what would we do if, we decide to quit? And we kind of gave ourselves a timeline, but it just so happened that on the next Monday, that timeline was sped up for us. And so we knew exactly what we were going to try. We had, a bit of a cushion just through like, severance. And that just gave us like all the confidence we needed to be able to just say, like, all right, for this like the time, we're gonna like, give our best effort trying to push our own, business. And thankfully it worked out.
It always fascinates me for like whatever, whether it's wrestling or if it's other things too, where people take kind of that leap of faith and going and on their own too. So like for you, it comes across like, oh, it's no big deal. But I'm trying to put myself into your shoes at that time. It's like, wow, I don't think I would have the guts to actually do that. I think it helps that you guys, were already doing things kind of on your own too, and were thinking about that. But wow, that's for me. I feel like, and probably the general person, I feel like that's a tough bridge to cross.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that, but you're right. Like for me, um, because I just saw the steps so clearly, it really didn't feel like that much of a courageous move. And I feel like if you ask maybe a lot of people about like things that I perceive to be incredibly like ambitious and courageous, I mean, if they see the basically the steps to the magic trick, they probably, don't think of it as big of a deal either. I mean, I would just say like we were both very fortunate, Number one, I'm fortunate to have somebody as, talented and as hardworking as John to partner up with. And then we just had an incredibly loyal fan base through our years of like producing content as part of the Fight Network and the Law that they were willing to follow us wherever we went. So yeah, I'm just lucky, honestly.
So you guys cover so much stuff. That's the next thing I wanted to ask you. So, and it's you and John, and you guys. I know you guys have plenty of people helping you out too. But just the amount of whether it's stuff on the website or then for your podcast too. I mean, you're covering Raw, SmackDown, NXT, Dynamite, Collision, New Japan pay per views. I mean, the list goes on. Plus, there's lots more stuff on Patreon too, bonus shows on top of that too. How do you guys? I mean, how do you manage that workload? Because I feel like it's for what you guys do. Many people probably think of what you do as like a dream job, but I feel like if they really sit down and think about it, I feel like yeah, it's you still get to do what you love to, but I cannot imagine how much work that is. How do you balance that workload?
Mm-hmm, I actually like think about this often just because like I follow a lot of um content about content creation and constantly a theme of it is that because for a lot of people these are dream jobs but it's about like there's a lot of content out there about burnout and then the constant sort of like striving to keep up and to keep up with other people that also want to make this their dream job. And it's exhausting, completely exhausting, and to the point where like I'm very conscious of like something that I love that I don't talk about right now. If I ever wanted to make content for it and really make it sort of like a full-time thing, I realize that I run the risk of it not no longer being my passion, no longer being a hobby, no longer being something I escape to without the pressure of having to, make sure people like paid money for it. So how do we manage it? I mean, we just, with all the wrestling that's out there, and it's more than doubled, in terms of like how much, like, I would say a like first run important relevant wrestling content there is to cover. We just go ahead and do it. We just like carve out the time. We do like run into our limits, and I think that was recently felt with like Collision, where we just said like there's no way we could sacrifice like
Yeah.
a weekend night, from our families, in order to cover the show. So we've had to reach out, of course, and we have incredibly capable network right now of like hosts and co-hosts that we can rely to. So John Cena, Kate from Montreal do an incredible job of it. They have for almost 2 months now. Um, People honestly like maybe more capable than me, certainly. So I'm really glad we could do that. As you mentioned, Braden and Davey are our friends who do NXT and have been doing that for, man, Braden's been doing it for I feel like 10 years at this point. So yeah, that's how we do it. We rely on other people, and then beyond that, we just kind of grind and time manage ourselves.
And how do you like because of like yeah, it's something that obviously is like a passion of both you and John too, but it's I myself work a 9 to 5 job where that has its downsides, but it also has there's tremendous benefits to that too. It's like when I'm home, unless I've got to do, I work with patients, so I might have to do like paperwork and stuff like that at home if I don't get all my patient notes done, stuff like that. But for the most part, if I do what I'm supposed to at work, I can get it done or get it close, good enough to where it can be picked up the next day. But for you guys, I feel like it's kind of a 24-hour gig in some ways.
Mhm.
How do you find that way where you can kind of decompress and take a step away from that with that kind of intense schedule of, oh, I've got something on every night that I've got to watch and then also cover? What do you do to kind of separate yourself?
Yeah, honestly, it's been a real challenge. Oftentimes I'm not necessarily able to separate it because I think from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, I'm trying to keep up with wrestling news just so that I know, what I'm talking about, right? Oftentimes, it's still something I really enjoy. I think even if I wasn't doing this, I'd be very interested in the world of oh, like what's going on with CM Punk, and
Right.
who's getting kicked out of like Collision. I mean, this
Right.
is just like juicy, fun gossip that I think anybody would be interested in. And thankfully, like that is like a big part of the job is just simply keeping up and
Mhm.
forming your own opinions about like these news events. But beyond that, you do need moments of like detaching for me, and it's detaching from like thinking about, oh, like what could be better about this, or like like I gotta make something for to promote this thing. Um and you just have to put it down eventually, at some point, because you just like lose energy. Like for me, it's hard I find I rarely like sit down and watch wrestling outside of the things I review, just because I sit down and watch so much of it just as part
Yeah.
of the job that like if you see in the background, I don't know how many people can see the video here, but like I have no wrestling stuff, in the back of my room here, because I get enough of it when I'm looking at the screen, when I'm looking forward, that
Mhm.
I kind of want the rest of my life to be filled with my other hobbies and interests. So that's kind of maybe how I detach.
So you mentioned other hobbies. What do you feel like if you're not covering wrestling? What do you like to do on a typical? Well, I should even say typical day because maybe it can't happen every day. But if you get that time to kind of dive into other hobbies, what are some of those things that you like to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question because like I feel like I've lost a lot of that right now. I mean, I really would love to devote more time just to kind of like doing any form of exercise. I feel like that's something I've really kind of let go ever since I had my first child, of course. But beyond that, I've always been a huge fan of Lego. As you can see in the background, that's a lot of what I fill my time with, and I have just a huge like backlog of things that I would love to just sit down and dedicate time to building, but for whatever reason, really haven't been able to. Music, is a bit of a passion of mine, so I like playing guitar. I would love to spend more time doing that, and taking care of myself as well. So probably some of those things.
Sure, sure. I can kind of relate to that. You mentioned, and I don't do Lego, but you said there's a stack of things. So I mentioned this to you before we got on air. I'm a big comic book guy, so I'm the guy at the comic shop. Every new books come out Wednesdays here, so every 1 to 2 weeks. And I'm looking off camera here. I've got a big stack of comics that have not been read yet, and they just build and build and build. And I don't even have any kids, so I think maybe behind you a step or two because I'm shouldn't be the case, but
Well, you have a job. I mean, clearly, life gets in the way. We all have like, something that like takes our time away. And I I can relate because I used to be, a Wednesday warrior. Is that what they call them?
yeah,
Um,
that's about right. That's about right. Yep, I've heard
and
that one a
then
time or two.
and then I just kind of gave up just because well, I found the process relatively like unsatisfying having to wait for chapter after chapter. So like if anything, I just kind of stopped reading altogether. But if I were to go back, I think I'd stick more to trades. Um, but eventually you'll get to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's something too. It's just sometimes I feel like that's what I do for a job is partially help people with time management, and sometimes I wonder like, am I great with that my with myself too? Because like, where does my time go? But I started mostly with trades, and I kind of went the other way but I don't read everything in single issues. I get the books I really like in singles, and then I read trades and pretty much everything else. I'm a kind of half and half, I guess, at this point. But
But
it
it's like there's a ritual of going to the store and picking up these items that's so much fun, right?
that's what I think that's what I like too. And like the shop I have, and I've been to shops that are not this way too. Like the guys that run the shop that I go to are super nice. Like you go in, you have that conversation with people. You can comment on, oh, like there's these new books. So there's that element too that I feel like if I read and trade, I don't have that, but I don't need that for every book that's out there. So if I'm just getting a handful of things, that's more manageable, and you can still kind of have those discussions and have fun going down to the shop, things like that. It's kind of a when I get off work Wednesday, it's something I can look forward to. That's kind of how I like to look at it, at least.
I completely understand. Yeah, every Wednesday it's like, oh, like this is my day to go to the comic shop or pick up this new thing. Even if it's just like a little tiny thing, again, you might not be reading, just the idea that you're going to get something new, you're going to be in a different environment, you're going to see these people that also feel this excitement.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful ritual.
absolutely. So kind of going back to Pose too, and I feel like you guys have been around for what 5-6 years at this point.
Yes, I
Okay,
believe we just had we're approaching our sixth. Yep.
okay.
Mhm.
So and I was aware of you guys before this too, but then I think before I actually kind of checked your guys' podcast, or I think I'd been to the site too. I think it was Chris Charlton from New Japan. I remember like he had brought you guys up on commentary a handful of times when I was watching. This was years ago. At this point, but I feel like you guys have a really good reputation within wrestling too. I'm also clearly, as if anyone can see this behind me, big action figure collector too. So I listen to the. Have you heard of the Major Wrestling Figure
Of course.
podcast?
Oh yeah.
So Brian is a big fan of you guys. He's brought that up on the podcast on several occasions too. So it's like I think overall, whether it's people that enjoy the content as fans or if it's other wrestlers kind of checking things out, I've heard lots of good things like over the years too. What do you think like attributes? What do you think is a tribute to that strong reputation that you guys have built in such a short period of time?
Um, First of all, it's still like pretty crazy for me to think like anybody in the industry would get any value out of like, what certainly I have to say. I understand why they would like John. He's an incredible reporter and just like he's I think superhuman when it comes to just, his research and dedication. So, but I'm like the fact that like, I could take up half the airtime and somehow bring something of value is still a bit mind-blowing to me. Um I think mm, I think a lot of it is just maybe a bit of a dedication to rational discussion, or maybe as rational as like we can put out there. We rarely, I think, ever try to sensationalize anything. My philosophy when it comes to podcasting is to just present, I think, what feels honest, what feels like a discussion that I would have with John off air, a discussion that we would have, just as friends, but recorded. So there's maybe hopefully that's part of it. I think I'm relatively balanced when it comes to my opinions, although depending on who you ask, I might be more biased, as we all would be. We're all humans. We all have
Right.
like one preference over another. So but I think for the most part I try to be as rational, and I try to see all sides of like, whether if it's something I'm reviewing or if it's a news topic. I really do try my best to um bring at least different perspectives about why something might be working, might be done, even if it doesn't necessarily work for me. So I hope that's a part of the reason why people might gravitate towards us. I think we have a natural, like sometimes, funny chemistry that a lot of people flock to as well, that they might come back to. But overall, I think maybe I hope that it's due to the comprehensive coverage or just the fact that people find us, like a warm, familiar voice at this point.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that too. It's just like I think you guys cover everything so thoroughly too. I think yeah, like you said, there's obviously going to be some opinion in everything, but you guys I think, like you said, you don't sensationalize anything like that too. I think people just get the sense that you and John and all the other people you have working for you too are just, I think, just good people. I think that's something that in wrestling and sometimes how wrestling is covered is not always the case too. And for me, if I get that sense, like for some reason, that's a big turnoff. Or if I get that sense from somebody where I feel like when I go to you guys, I know I can trust you and John to cover things, and it's like, okay, well, there's actually some good people talking about these topics too. Not that that's maybe important to everybody, but for me it is, and I feel like I always get that sense from you guys.
I appreciate that. I'm curious because I guess I'm curious to know like what you mean when like do you feel certain people covering might be dishonest or might have like different agendas? I just want to kind of
I
pick
think
at
it's
to see what that means.
I think it's some of both too, and I think there's a lot of people that are very good. I feel like wrestling, and that's a big distinction between what is journalism and what is not too. So that's a debate that I won't even get into for what people think there too. But I think like there's definitely those people out there that yeah, I mean there's lots of a lot of the BS or a lot of like not that you don't cover like people obviously cover rumors in a way too, but I feel like there's definitely some things where people yeah they have agendas, they have maybe biases towards certain people, and it's like when I hear that, it kind of takes me out of it a little bit too, especially when that's kind of mixed in with like what is fact and what is not fact too. So I don't know. It just I don't know if I can even articulate it better than that, but it's just one of those things where I just feel like you guys are very honest people, and that for some reason that comes across for me.
Mm. Cool, cool. Well, I mean, I'm glad like the medium kind of offers a bit of everything because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like with podcasting, really, it's just whoever you are, whatever you want to present, like you somebody out there might want to listen to it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
for a lot of people, it is like, more like opinion, more
Mm-hmm.
personality,
Mm-hmm.
more, I guess bias if you want to call it that, as long as
Mm-hmm.
it reflects yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said it right too. It's there's definitely room for everything too. But I just like the balance that you guys have where it's yes there is opinion and your thoughts on this because I mean if it's a review show it's kind of what your thoughts are, but it's um, definitely toe that line, which is I think for me that's what I prefer, for sure, for sure.
So, cool.
So one thing I was going to ask too, and this is kind of I don't know if you've had this question or maybe for you since you've been doing this for so long, maybe it's just not even something you are aware of even, but um, if you meet somebody that maybe doesn't follow wrestling, how do you explain to them kind of what you do for your job? How does that go? Is that do you get
Mm.
weird looks? Do people get it right away? Because I feel like podcasts are so popular, so people I feel like at this point are very comfortable with that. But I'm just thinking of my own experiences and like okay, if I tell people I like wrestling and they have usually a lot of questions.
Mhm.
So taking that one step further for you, or do you feel like you're too far in that it's just that doesn't really happen too much for you at this point?
No, I get it all the time. It
Okay.
happens all the time. Where like I hang out with like my wife's friends and they all have like I don't know, they're accountants, they're dentists, they're uh people who have like business related jobs. And then I tell them I'm a wrestling podcaster. And like they just I think I get the sense a lot of them think it's just a hobby. Like, oh, like,
Sure.
I must not like he must be unemployed and he must like not do anything but like, occasionally talk about a very weird niche thing. But like I have to explain, yeah, this is like my full-time job and it's just kind of what I feed my family on. And I I think typically the response is there's enough to talk about, like
Yep.
in professional wrestling, because you have to think about it like the way somebody might think about for professional wrestling might be the way I think about um horse racing or like cricket or I guess like I'm trying to think speed cubing, like Rubik's cube speed, like what I'm talking about, like speed
Yeah.
cubing.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So like I'm like there's enough to talk about to fill like what, an hour a week, much less like every single day. And I'm like, yeah, like there's a lot. It's a very deep and complex sort of like world where I mean a lot of content is being produced, but beyond that there's behind the scenes news every single day. So I do my best to explain it if they're interested. Otherwise, I just don't even bother, like, because
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Right. I always like in people that know me, I feel like I'm an open book about wrestling, but I don't go out of my way to bring it up usually because it's just like I feel like if people get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't, and you're not going to change their mind about it for the most part. That's been my experience where it's just like, I'm fine with the questions, but this happened to me recently where I started a new job May of last year, and I think what I did. So AEW came to Minneapolis, so I took, let's see, I think I took a couple days off because it's a 4 to 5 hour drive for me, hotel stay. So I took those days off, and then they asked me like, oh, like what are you planning to do? Because they approved the days off, and then it had to come out like, okay, I'm going to a wrestling show, and then the questions started coming in. And then the later on that year, we were planning for our Christmas party with the entire staff, and they turned to me and said, "Oh, sorry, Matthew, maybe next year we'll go to a wrestling show." So then, pretty soon, everybody knows, and we're having this whole discussion on pro wrestling, and there's lots of unique takes on that. So it's something that I'm always fascinated to hear. If people that are very obviously, if this is what you do for your job too, I can imagine there's some interesting conversations.
I mean, I'm sure you had like, oh, that stuff's not like, do you still get that stuff's not real, right? Like, did you still get that?
Yes, yes, and that's what somebody told me that too. And this person, I love this person to death. They're a very good person, but it was something like, oh, that's just all like fake, right? They don't actually like get hurt or anything. I'm like, well, there's actually a lot of like injuries, and it's like that's actually a pretty big problem, I think, to some extent. Or yes, where it's like, but I just don't know how that question still gets asked. But it's like if you're watching a Marvel movie, do you think that's real? But for some reason there's that line that for some reason people just can't, they just don't get it. I don't know why that is,
Yeah, I
but
mean, I think for the most part, like maybe throughout history, wrestling has been presented as something that like it's been a
yeah.
con, right?
Hmm.
So I think a lot of people might just not be caught up, to the point where I think a lot of us enjoy it because like it's a fiction, like it's The Sopranos, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but I get a lot of like, oh man, I used to watch all the time when it was like Steve Austin and The Rock, and then like I of course get the Rock and Austin impressions, and I'm just like, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, they were great.
Yeah, no, that happens. That happens a lot too. And now that I've started doing podcasts, and I'm very like new into this, so it's just starting to. And um,
Well, you're doing a great job.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's something I've listened a lot to, so it's like trying to do it myself. I'm trying to do the very best that I can do, but it's a learning curve. And trying to get people to do interviews, I knew that it was going to be hard. Like coming from just starting from nothing, I knew it'd be really hard, and I did not anticipate how hard it would actually be for the amount of like time that goes into trying to coordinate that and get dates down, and even to give people like for they will respond to your message or email. Like that is something that is like I knew it'd be really hard. I didn't anticipate how hard that would be. It's been,
Mhm.
but I think it's been good. I've had to work hard for it, and it's just like okay, now I know kind of what the deal is with that, and I probably did not right away. So it's been a good experience so far, but it's something hoping to keep going with.
What
That's
made
for
you
sure.
want to get involved?
Gosh, I mean, I
Like,
think
what, as in involved in creating stuff for around professional wrestling?
I just think it's not something I would not label myself as. I always think of being artistic and creative as the same thing, when really they're not too. But I've never really been someone that's created really a lot of like anything. I've always like worked hard and I've got things done that I wanted to do, but just I never had that urge to try something more. And it's really something I really did table for a few years, where it's just kind of like, well, I listen to podcasts. It's like that's what I do pretty much all the time, even over music. If I'm going for a run, if I'm going for a walk, or if I'm,
Hmm.
at work doing paperwork where I have some time, I'll throw in a podcast too. So it's just something that I really grew to appreciate. That became a big part of my life. And it's like, yeah, I'm not probably the most knowledgeable, person in the world, but I felt like it's something that, for me, it was just something that I don't have that many people day to day life that I can talk wrestling with too. So it's just like there was some sort of connection there where it was a perfect storm of, hey, I would like to talk about this more. I have an interest in the podcast side, whether it's for wrestling or lots of other things too. And it's something that I feel like was, yeah, I didn't know how to do any of it right away. I taught myself as best as I can for right now. But it felt like it was something that wasn't out of reach, where I could do it and at least get something out there on my own. Where it was very daunting for me to think of like, okay, I need somebody else to help me with this. So it's kind of like, okay, I want to do something with wrestling. I thought about doing some type of like writing, but then what do you do with that too? So that I went down the podcast road. I'm like, even if nobody listens to this, for me, it's just I enjoy the process so much, and I didn't know how much I would enjoy it right away. So it's just one of those things that I just put an episode out, and then I'm like, okay, I'll just keep trying, and then another, and then another, and hopefully it'll keep going. But something I've had a lot of fun with for sure so far.
That's so awesome. And again, just maybe as somebody who, is looking from the outside, I mean, you've been incredibly professional to deal with. I think the way you interview is, thus far in these 30 minutes, it's really good. Like you just kind of like keep your questions. I mean, obviously you're prepared, but you keep the questions relatively short. You're letting a guest like me ramble on and on and on. And I don't notice you like using any ums or uhs, which is like something I still struggle with, when it comes to talking. So um, you're doing great.
Well, appreciate it, appreciate it. I've had people that have been on the show that really. There was only one person that I've had as a guest so far that I knew ahead of time too. So the people that have like responded and taken the time to do this too have really like helped me out and have been patient with like any technical glitches. I think so far things have went pretty smooth on that front, but it's one of those things that people have been. I was surprised how giving people really are. I expected it to be the total opposite, where it's just like, okay, people will give you this much time, but the people that I've had on really have been super super patient, but also just like very complimentary and giving of their time. And like if they give me tips on, okay, maybe you could try this or that too, because that's where I feel like I do my best work is like, oh, if you give me, you could do this better.
Mhm.
To me, I'm like, okay, that's great. I want to implement that as soon as I can, because I'm very aware that my experience level is very low. And there's a lot I still I still have to learn and can get better. So I feel like we're always trying to improve one day at a time. So that's what I try to do with this too. It's worked well for other areas of my life, so I'm trying to transfer that energy here. So uh,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing a year from now what this show might look like.
yeah, I do too. It's something that I think I'm at the point now where there's no going back from it. It's just, I kind of upload episodes as I can, but it's just one of those things that's like, yeah, if I can increase how many I'm doing, great. But it's always trying to make it manageable, because it is just, it's something I'm doing for fun for right now, and we'll see kind of where it goes. But it's been very very rewarding at this point. That's what I can say.
Very
Um,
cool.
well, before we get out of here, Wei, I know you've been very gracious with your time already. To one thing I wanted to kind of point out for people that for anyone that doesn't know, these shows maybe didn't bring me to post, but like once I found them, they were something I really enjoyed too. So the two shows I'm talking about were the Talk with you and John, and then also the Wellness Policy. Like those are
Wow.
not the things that brought me there, but it's like, wow, when I listen to those, for some reason, those are like two of my favorite things that you guys do, even though it's not probably the thing that is at the forefront. Um, how about you? Could you talk about those a little bit more? How did you guys end up deciding to go forward with both of those? They've both been running for a little while now, so it's not like it's new, but um, could you
Huh.
talk about that for a bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So the wellness policy is a show that I think we're coming up on like 2, maybe even 3 years, honestly, at this point. It was something that came out of the pandemic, and my conversations with somebody who I guess has listened to us for a long time, but I never necessarily interacted with. His name is Jordan Goodman. He's my co-host on the wellness policy, and I think I heard him on Braden Davies' feed, on the Poison Rana feed. They did an episode, I think, at the pandemic about like talking about maybe coping with like isolation or something. And I thought, oh, okay, this guy's like really interesting. He has a lot of like, stuff to say. Um, and then I don't know how we kind of like met up, but like we started like talking to each other online, and sounds like a online dating actually. We started like chatting. I mean, it kind of is like that when you're starting a podcast with somebody. So, we started having like really enjoyable conversations regularly. And then I've always wanted to do more, again, maybe because we do so much professional wrestling content. I've I've always sensed like our audience, is similar to me in that like we only have so much room for wrestling in our lives. Um, and we're about more than, we have more interest than just professional wrestling, and I certainly felt that way. So that's also when I started like suggesting doing, well, actually we were doing Marvel reviews as well at the time, and that seemed to get a pretty good amount. So I felt like a show just simply talking about like issues that were important maybe to people of our demographic and age bracket, I think would be interesting. And Jordan is a licensed therapist, and there were so many things about like self-improvement that always interested me. And honestly, like I heard about how much John was reading. Like John reads like, a book a week, or like, I don't
It's
know, five
crazy.
books a week
I
or
I
something like that.
cannot even imagine taking that
Yeah.
on. I just
They're crazy, right? So
Yes.
I mean, I just wanted to maybe, find some form of like self-improvement for myself. And part of that was like wanting to read more. So it kind of started off as almost a bit of a book club where like Jordan and I, we'd spend a month, reading a book and then talking about it. And the first episode, I believe, was about this book called Flow, about the concept of flow. And I really enjoyed it. And we did a few book reviews, to springboard into like kind of topics about self-improvement. And then eventually we had some guests on, and then we kind of eventually realized like, man, reading is a lot of work, and I also don't know how many how engaged other people necessarily are because they haven't read the book. So the show has since evolved into more of like, just strictly like a topic based conversation, where we would either have a guest on or we would just kind of like talk about the topic ourselves with the audience. We found like a really great core group of people that would tune in live and constantly like call in with their own like, perspectives on certain topics. And then we eventually evolved to include our man Neil Flanagan, who, constantly contributed through phone calls on our other shows, but also, had a personal friendship with Jordan and now myself that he just really kind of perfectly fit into our dynamic. So that's a show we continue to do, and it's constantly evolving. We just did a show where we didn't even have topics, and it was just like open discussion, and a lot of people felt like that was our best episode yet.
Yeah,
So I encourage it.
I was gonna say that one I listened to that one was yeah I did enjoy that. I mean it's nice to have a mix of topics and then episode like that where there's no topic. So if you wanted my opinion, that was a great thing to mix in for sure. I liked it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I definitely think we'll want to adopt like elements of that for future episodes. But then, speaking about like not having a topic, I mean, Talk, is a show that John and I started. I was honestly I've always like enjoyed that sort of podcasting. As I mentioned, my philosophy when it comes to podcasting is just like turn the microphone on and pretend like nobody else is listening, right?
Right.
And I've always listened to podcasts like that, and then I think I was like really inspired listening to Braden and Davey. Again, they are just major influences for me. Of course, I strive to be like the BDE at some point. Anyway, they do the show on their Patreon called um man God, behind the BDE, yes, where it's just the two of them talking, and I just like I listen to everyone. I'm a huge fan of it, and honestly, beyond that, it's like thinking about what John and I can record without having to do that much prep for. And we're always so afraid of like, oh, who's going to be like, care to listen to this? Like anytime we spend too much time bantering at the start of a review, I'm like, man, we're taking up. Like I'm so self-conscious about like, um, this is not what people are here for. But evidently, this is what a lot of our audience is there
Yes,
for,
I was
especially.
gonna say. I mean, I think like for me too. Like after you listen to you guys for a while, people start to feel like they know you guys and know your kind of chemistry that you have too. So like personally, I love those times where it's just like okay, we get off topic for a second, or you have a whole show dedicated to that, just getting kind of updates too. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely people. I think people like that quite a bit.
Totally, yeah. So we just decided to record it, and again, like reception was really strong from, especially from our. That's the thing about Patreon. People are kind of paying for what you're listening to. You know that they probably like you, and there's a good chance that they're here for not just the content, but like for to know a little bit more about yourselves too. So since becoming a parent, there's a lot that John and I bond over, as it relates to that experience, and that was sort of like that's a sort of a show where we can talk a lot about that as well as everything else going on with our lives.
Awesome. Yeah, that's something I just didn't. I didn't think, oh, I would not like those when I first tried them, but it's just like I listened to them. I was like, wow, I could. I wish this was like something that I could listen to like every week. Is there just so there's so much that you guys could talk about too, and you just get to know you guys at a deeper level too, which is for me, which is great.
It's
Um,
awesome.
so wait, I won't take any more of your time too. But before we get out of here, where can everybody find you and find Post Wrestling? And so please plug like the Patreon too, because there's a lot of great stuff there that unlimited stuff where you basically like you guys have stuff coming out every day,
Yeah, I
which is
appreciate
awesome.
I really appreciate the platform, Matthew. And again, like, I look forward to seeing what this turns into a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, because it sounds like you just have so much potential for evolution and growth and perfection. Um,
Well, thank
but
you.
You can find our stuff at postwrestling.com. We run and beyond podcasting, of course, a really robust, if I will say so myself, news coverage website where you get, of course, up-to-date information as well as opinions and show reports for pretty much every single thing happening in professional wrestling. Some great write-ups right now from John Pollock. About Bray Wyatt. So I encourage everybody to check that out. You can find Post Wrestling on all of the podcast feeds that you might download podcasts on, including this one, wherever you're listening. And if you really like us and want to support the channel, go to postwrestlingcafe.com. That is the link to our Patreon where we do bonus podcasts, reviews of Collision, SmackDown, retro reviews, talk, as Matthew mentioned. All those things can be found for our premium elite VIP, MVP listeners at postwrestlingcafe.com.
Awesome. And those links will be put down below in the description so people hopefully can just head down there. If you're interested, click on over. But Wade, thank you again for making the time to do this. It was a real honor to meet you, as I've been a fan of you guys for a long time. So best of luck going forward, and thank you again.
Thank you, Matthew. All the best.